Welcome to another installment of Monday Q&A. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend. I'm certainly looking forward to answering some of your questions. As always, if you've got questions you would like me to answer on next week's Q&A video, simply put them in the comments section below. A big thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. A big thank you to everybody who's gone and bought some music. And a big thank you to everybody who has been enjoying the new podcast that I started with my good friend Troy Nabavan called The Gear Podcast. You can also come and join my Discord server if you want to chat about any of these things. I had a pretty big end of the week, so the weekend was a nice quiet one for me, but we opened for the Iron Maidens on Thursday night in Perth. Awesome turnout. They must have got pretty close to selling that one out. It's one of the best Perth shows I think we've done in quite a while. And then we got to do our set and I got to sing along to all my favorite Iron Maiden songs for the rest of the night. So if any of you were there or any people who were there who hadn't seen us before and you're watching this, thanks so much for jumping on board. I'll link all the stuff that I mentioned earlier in the video description as well. And for now, time to get my Dame Edna glasses on and answer some of your questions. First question, funnily enough, is about my new glasses, which I am doing my best to normalize through these Q&A videos. Do I need them or do I use them when I play guitar? I haven't found the need for them just yet, but I think a lot of what I do when I look down at my guitar when I'm playing it is not super focused, if that makes sense. Like I just need to roughly know where I am. I basically just kind of look at the side dots on the neck so I know where I am. And as I'm sure a lot of people would agree, the guitar after a long time just kind of becomes a touchy-feely instrument where you don't have to watch your fingers touch the frets or anything like that. It becomes second nature. So for me, it's more about just very roughly spotting where I am, making sure I am where I think I am on the guitar. And luckily for me, I've just got astigmatism in the left eye. It's actually not too bad. And I'm pretty fine playing without the glasses. For now, we'll see if that changes over time. You don't catch me playing an SG very often. Why is that? I will be the first to admit that the SG, while I think it looks great, and while I really, really like the aesthetic and the sound with some of my favorite players, I'm looking at you, Angus Young and Tony Iommi, and a bunch of other people who make SGs absolutely scream. It's just not the right Gibson-style guitar for me, and I suspect that's actually because I'm quite tall. So when I play an SG, it kind of looks like a ukulele, whereas if I play a 335 or I play an Explorer-shaped guitar, they kind of scale a little bit more onto me. I've got the Hamer Standard, which is just basically a 58 Explorer replica, which I think is probably the coolest looking, not a Les Paul Gibson shape out there. So I tend to gravitate towards those, or Flying V I love. I've played some SGs which sound amazing and they definitely have a sound. I think in particular an SG in a two guitar band, again, think of AC/DC where you've got Angus playing an SG and you've got Malcolm playing a Gretsch, and they contrast against one another. And it's not about having one thing that sounds huge. It's about having two things which on their own might not sound huge, but they sound huge together. But let me know if you're an SG fan and what your favorite SG model is, because I've seen a lot of SGs over the year where I go, yeah, that looks awesome. And then I see myself playing it and I go, that's a little bit weird. Maybe it's just pure vanity. And for that reason, that's why the SG probably isn't the guitar for me, even though I think it is one of the coolest Gibson shapes out there. Speaking of guitars, have I ever tried any of the Friedman guitars? And if I have, what do I think about them? Well, I haven't, so I don't really know what to think about them. I do really like the, is it Sabbat or Shabbat guitars? I think they were making Friedman guitars for a while, and I know Michael Nielsen has one, and I know my good friend and patron saint of the channel, Mr. Brian Hook, has one, and they both seem to rave about those. So I'm sure they are very, very tasty instruments. I kind of like the vintage aesthetic that a lot of them have, where, they kind of have a little bit of the relic thing going on. And it's one of those things where you initially look at it and you don't immediately recoil in disgust because it kind of looks off. So I think if you're doing a vintage Fender thing, they kind of got it right, in my opinion. They're very cool looking guitars, and I've heard clips where they sound fantastic. The thing that I will say is that the price tag, especially down here in Australia, is absolutely eye-watering. And I think if I was going to go with a custom Strat or Tele style thing, I would probably look at some other places first. But, you know, there's probably some people on here who own those guitars, so tell me all about them. In the same way that you might also own an SG and you want to change my mind, I'm always open to having my mind changed on these kind of things, especially when, let's face it, I haven't tried one. I've just heard clips and seen them and seen the price and, you know, not really thought too hard about it. This one comes from one of my patrons, Dom. We're talking about drum kits here. Ah, Lupin, right on time, mate. What do you think about drum kits? You a bit of a drummer yourself? Smacking on that door at 5 a.m. in the morning? There we go. This is great. For everybody who likes the cats, remember you can contribute to my Patreon and help keep my cat fed, which is maybe why he's up here and he's gone. Just a little cameo. What was I saying? Dom was talking about drummers having to use different drum kits night by night. So I recorded our show on Thursday night just on like phone camera, and it was basically just drum cam for the whole show. So I've uploaded that to my Patreon for anybody who wants to watch it. But Dom made the point that he's noticed that Cam rarely plays his own kit at a lot of shows. There's shared backline, or we're using the venue kit. A lot of the kind of original shows that we play, we're either doing a support for a national or an international act, or we're doing a headline show, but it's not at home, it's interstate or somewhere else. So basically, you know, why would you take your drum kit on a plane? That is never going to happen. So Cam has got very, very comfortable over the years using different backline kits. And in fact, the last time we were in Melbourne, I borrowed a guitar as well, and Ryan borrowed a bass. So we pretty much had none of our own instruments, and that was a super fun show. And I think it's one of those things where the more you play out, the more experience you get touring and traveling, I guess the more resilient you become. Where before I had ever played live, you know, I had this long list of, when I play live, I need to have a 10-space rack, and I need 4 different guitars in different tunings, and I need a tech, and I need the right gauge of strings, and, you know, just this long fantasy list. And now for me, as long as I have a guitar that's in the right tuning that can stay in tune for an entire song, I'm pretty confident that I can get through a gig, you know, no matter like how awful the action is or how crusty the strings are. As long as those strings can stay in tune for a whole song, as long as they don't break every single song, I'm pretty comfortable on the guitar. And I think that is even more of a factor when you're a drummer, because when you're traveling, like I said, it's not feasible to take your own drum kit anywhere. You might get to set up the house kit or the other backline kit the way you like it, but sometimes you do shows where they say, hey, you can use the backline kit, just don't adjust anything, which I think is fair enough. So Cam often compares it to showing up to a gig, not knowing what type of guitar you're going to be playing. It might be a 6-string, it might be a 7-string, it might be an 8-string, it might be left-handed, you just never know. So I have so much respect for drummers who can do that and just kind of get the job done on just about any kit. And that is something, like I said, that resilience and that ability to think on your feet and to problem solve, that's probably the absolute best quality you can have as a musician, because those skills are really foundational, not just for playing music, just for kind of getting around and enjoying your life in general. So yeah, I have definitely learned a lot from that approach, watching drummers just get by on kits that aren't their own kits. I was asked whether I had tried the Fender Runaway pedal, and I have to admit I had never heard of it. So I looked it up, and it's like a wah style pedal, but it's a feedbacker. And then I saw the price that they are going for used. I saw one listed for 1,800 Australian dollars. So I have never tried one of those. I'd never heard of it before. I don't know if I'll ever be able to try one of those given the price that they are going for. They are obviously quite a desirable item. If anybody's got one that they want to let me borrow, that would be pretty cool, because then I could do a video about it, because that's kind of like getting into Klon bad monkey territory right there with the price. I have no idea what they sold for initially, but I doubt it was 1,800 Australian dollars. So maybe that's just kind of, you know, Google search showing up the most extreme results. But if you've got one of those pedals, what does it do? What does it sound like? And if there's anyone local who wants to loan one to me, let me know and I will do a video about it, because now I am genuinely curious. This is a question that I've answered in kind of different ways before. If you can see all the stuff behind me, as soon as I tell you what the question is, you can probably guess what my answer is going to be. But the idea of finding the right guitar, especially if you're an intermediate player and you keep running into, say, perceived flaws with different instruments. So let's say, for example, you have a Strat. It's your only guitar and you started on a Strat and you kind of keep playing and you keep getting better and you start finding out that maybe a Strat isn't the most appropriate instrument for every single style of music. So you go and buy a Les Paul and you get the Les Paul and you have that honeymoon period where the Les Paul is doing a whole bunch of stuff that the Strat doesn't do and it's awesome. But then you realize the Les Paul can't really do Strat things that the Strat does really, really well. So you go, well, maybe I need something in the middle. So you go and buy a PRS and you get a PRS and it does 90% of what the Les Paul does and 90% of the Strat thing, but it doesn't really go the distance on either of them. So you start looking around for more guitars and you end up like me, where you just have a bunch of guitars. So is it worth going through that process and trying to find the one, or should you just kind of persevere with what you have? I obviously think that owning more than one guitar is a totally reasonable thing to do. There is something to be said about persevering with an instrument, because I think a lot of the time for beginner or intermediate players, they can chalk up, say, the roadblocks that they're running into or, say, deficiencies in their playing to the instrument that they're using. Like, oh, this guitar doesn't sound good enough or it doesn't play good enough. And then you'll have an advanced player grab that same thing and make it sound great and play really, really well. So sometimes I think what can happen there is that having a different instrument can actually let you work around those deficiencies in your playing. You know, I'm kind of justifying gear acquisition syndrome here. I'm not saying that gear will fix your playing. I'm saying that having some different options, some different tools in your arsenal is probably a good thing, because I know some days I pick up a Strat and I love it and I play really fluently on it, and other times I just can't vibe with it. I need to pick up my PRS in drop C and just chunk away at a bunch of riffs like that. Different guitars are going to play differently. They're going to sound different. You are essentially changing the initial conditions of your playing, and, you know, your playing and your day-to-day mood and all those kind of things are a very sensitive dynamical system, realistically, and they're very sensitive to initial conditions. So changing those initial conditions probably going to have a non-linear impact on what you're doing. So I don't think you need 20 different guitars in order to have a good time, but having the main food groups covered, even just having two contrasting instruments, is probably a good recipe for working around those frustrations that we all run into from day to day as players. Let me know your thoughts in the comments anyway. To round out this week, what do I think are the 3 greatest rack effect processors of all time? I'm gonna break this into a double question. We'll go what I think are the most iconic out of all the rack processors that you might have seen in golden era, you know, big refrigerator-sized guitar racks, and 3 of my personal favorites. So we'll go with what I would consider, the people's choice for all of these. I'm going to say straight up that the TC2290 is probably right in there. That is a very, very desirable unit. It can actually do a whole bunch of stuff. It can do delay, chorus, flanges, compression, expansion. It's got 5 different pedal effects loops in there, so people could use it as like the brain of their rack. Very, very well engineered and thought out unit. And it also sounds absolutely gorgeous. The Eventide H3000, you know, Steve via Passion and Warfare kind of put that one on the map. And to this day, that thing just sounds like nothing else. The detunes, the pitch effects, the reverbs, the delays, it is an absolute masterpiece of digital technology. And then I'm going to go with the Lexicon PCM70 as my 3rd choice. That's obviously very popular because of players like Steve Lukather, and it was used on a lot of recordings. My cat's going absolutely mental in the background, so apologies about that. What was I saying? The PCM70. Yeah, stuff like the rich plate reverb is on so many great records from the late 80s and early 90s. The verbs, the delays are just iconic, and it's got a sound. Like, it doesn't sound quite as hi-fi as something like the PCM80 or later Lexicons. It's still got a bit of that, 224, 480 DNA in there. The concert hall is gorgeous. Yeah, it's probably overkill in a guitar rig for most people, but when I got one, it was one of those things where I went, yeah, that's the sound. So I think all 3 of those units as like the top shelf desirable rack units, most people wouldn't disagree with. For me, I'm going to go with 3 different ones that I think are more like accessible to the everyday guitar player. So let's sort of say a parallel universe top 3. You can see one of them in the background, hopefully. The Sony DPS M7 kind of does all the Eventide stuff in its own way. It's a single rack space unit. They are kind of rare and hard to find, but there are amazing delays in there. The spiral delay is unlike anything else I've ever heard. It's up there with the 2290 for a super wide stereo sounding thing. The pitch detune in it is great. There are some fantastic modulation effects in there. It doesn't do reverb. They've got a separate reverberator unit for doing that. So that's one of my favorites. Another one would be the Korg A3, as used by the Edge and Adrian Bellew. Again, another single space unit. The menu is so tiny, it's really, really hard to use, but the sounds in there are fantastic. And if it wasn't for that association with the Edge, I think you would be able to find them a lot cheaper than you can get them nowadays. And one last one, the PCM 8081 as an alternative to the PCM 70 is fantastic. And those units are so powerful, very difficult to tweak. I think that is the main shortcoming in there, but just next level lush. Like, I like the PCM 70 because the reverbs are a little bit kind of crusty and they've got a lot of character, but the PCM 80 and 81 are just gorgeously pristine. The stuff you can do with the delays in there is phenomenal. You've got some great pitch effects in there. They're just amazing. And the prices are really starting to creep up at the moment. I think I paid about 800 Australian dollars for mine. And recently I checked and they are worth quite a bit more now. But yeah, like the PCM 80, 81, the Sony DPS, and then the Korg A3 would be 3 of my other favorite units that I've tried. Probably put in the Roland SDE delays in there. They're fantastic. The Lexicon MPX1 is amazing. I've actually got a video about this, like what I think 5 of the best rack units are that don't break the bank that you can check out. The Roland DEP5 is another one. I'm just ranting and raving and listing so many things that I've tried. Let me know what your 3 favorite rack mount effects processors are in the video description. That is it for this week. Like I said at the start of the video, if you want some cool stuff to check out the video description. Have a great week. And I'll see you all next time for another installment of Monday Q&A. Take it easy.